Jesus asks a question before he tells this parable. In Luke 13:18, he says, "What is the kingdom of God like, and to what shall I compare it?" He is not asking because he does not know the answer. He is inviting his audience to lean in, to wonder alongside him, to feel the weight of the question before the answer arrives. And then, out of everything available to him, out of cedar trees and lions and eagles and all the grand imagery the Old Testament used to describe kingdoms and power and divine majesty, he picks a mustard seed, the smallest thing he could have chosen. And his audience laughed, not mockingly, but with recognition, because in first century Jewish culture, documented extensively in the Mishnah and Talmudic literature, the mustard seed was the standard proverbial expression for something negligibly, laughably small. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus used it repeatedly in the Talmud to describe the tiniest measurable quantity. As small as a mustard seed was the idiom of his day, the way we might say, as small as a grain of sand. Jesus was not making a botanical claim. He was not saying the mustard seed was literally the smallest seed in existence. There were smaller seeds known to first century horticulturalists. He was reaching for the most culturally resonant image of insignificance available to him. The kingdom of God, he says, is like that. Like the thing everyone uses as the punchline for smallness. And here is where the parable begins to do something subversive. Because the mustard seed grows, not into something modest and appropriate to its origins, but into the largest of garden plants, large enough that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. That image, birds nesting in the branches of a great tree, was not a casual detail Jesus invented on the spot. It was a direct and deliberate echo of 3 specific Old Testament passages that every Jewish scholar in his audience would have recognized immediately. Ezekiel 17:23. God plants a cedar on a high mountain and says, "Birds of every kind will nest in it," describing the restoration of Israel as a great empire sheltering all nations. Ezekiel 31:6. The great empire of Assyria described as a tree so tall that all the birds of the air nested in its boughs, a symbol of a world power under whose shadow the nations found shelter. Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a great tree reaching to heaven, with beautiful foliage and fruit for all, under which the beasts found shade, and in whose branches the birds of the air lived. In every single one of these passages, a great tree sheltering birds is the image of a world empire, a dominant, civilization-shaping power that draws all nations under its influence. Jesus takes that image, loaded with centuries of prophetic and imperial meaning, and applies it to a mustard seed. He is not saying the kingdom will be large. He is saying the kingdom will be what the empires of the world tried and failed to be, a sheltering place for all nations. And it will get there from the most improbable starting point imaginable. But there is one more layer that almost nobody preaches. The mustard plant, in first century Palestinian agriculture, was considered a weed, not a garden plant in the decorative sense. A fast-growing, aggressively spreading plant that once established was almost impossible to contain. Jewish agricultural law, specifically the Mishnah tractate Kilayim, actually regulated the planting of mustard because of how invasively it spread. You could not plant it near certain crops because it would take over. Jesus is not describing a kingdom that grows into something tame and manageable and institutionally respectable. He is describing a kingdom that grows the way a weed grows, unstoppably, boundary crossing, impossible to contain once it takes root. The religious establishment of his day had spent centuries trying to build the kingdom of God. Through political power, military alliance, priestly authority, and meticulous legal observance. They were thinking cedar tree. They were thinking eagle. They were thinking Ezekiel's mountain. Jesus handed them a mustard seed and said, This is how it starts. This is how it spreads. And by the time you realize what it has already taken over the garden. The kingdom of God entered the world as a carpenter's son from Nazareth. a city so insignificant that Nathanael asked,
Nazareth? You have got to be kidding me.
"Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" It spread through 12 ordinary men, most of them from Galilee. The region the religious establishment considered the least theologically sophisticated in all of Israel. It survived crucifixion. It outlasted the Roman Empire that executed its founder. It crossed every border that empire and religion tried to draw around it. Mustard seed, unstoppable weed, sheltering tree. The question this parable asks is not, do you believe the kingdom is powerful? It is, can you recognize it when it looks small? Because the kingdom rarely arrives the way we expect. It rarely starts where we are looking. It rarely comes with the credentials we require. It comes as a seed, laughably small, culturally improbable. And then, before anyone has properly assessed whether it deserves to be taken seriously, it has already taken root. Comment below. Where have you seen the kingdom of God start as a mustard seed in your own life? Something that looked too small to matter and turned into something you never expected? Tell me, because someone reading your answer today needs to know that their small beginning is not an obstacle to the kingdom. It might be exactly how the kingdom works. Tomorrow.
What on earth is that?
The yeast.
Is it a bomb?
And the reason Jesus used that specific image, an image his entire audience associated with corruption and contamination, is one of the most provocative things he ever said about how the kingdom spreads.